Just finished up doing yard work in the backyard. I planted the avocado because I didn't want it to die in the pot. Mowed the whole yard, whipper snipped or wee whacked, then hedge trimmed all the stuff on the fences. And see the yard. It's a bugger of a yard to mow because it's all uneven and a really big slope. There's the avocado. You might be able to see we got a blue sky down there, but all of this here is smoke from their hazard reduction burn. And same thing as last time. It was all away from here, but the wind seems to turn in the afternoon. And we've actually got little bits of ash dropping into the yard now. You probably will not be able to see them, but just some very, very, very fine bits of ash dropping down in the yard. And it's only 20 past 4. So, but it started feeling like evening at about 1 today, because we're getting to the point where the sun stays behind trees to our north almost the whole day. That's it. I just caught a bit of ash. It's not a lot, but it's enough to be mildly concerned. Check on the app and see whether they are saying it's still under control, because it's really thick today compared to yesterday. More hazard reduction burning today. Oh, it looks like they're just getting a little bit closer. It's not a bombing helicopter, it's just basically keeping an eye out, I think. You might just be able to hear the helicopter outside. The fire's coming closer. And too loud or not. We're activating. Seems it's coming down the gully outside of the house. It's been the other side of the gully, that other ridge. But when you look down the gully, it's starting to come down, and I'll show you in a minute. I think what we'll end up doing is just setting up some standpipes and hoses just to be ready. The fire brigade's app says that it's under control. I think we're just our commander's just being cautious. Better to be prepared than not, I guess. You know, that too tight. Tighten this up yesterday because when I had my goggles on, it pushes your goggles down. Let's go. So that's why we're activating. I'm standing in the back corner of our yard and it's coming. It's still, part of it looks like it's still the other side of that bit of ridge. but this morning it was the other side of the whole ridge. So the wind's in our favour because it's blowing away. But I know that throughout this week the wind has been turning in the afternoon. Bandicoot's been going to town. Look at all these little holes through the yard. Actually shone the torch down here last night and spotted him when he was here again, because I'd filled that in. So he was digging again and under the sprinkler, and then he slinked down this way. Now I've just turned on the water up the top.
So once it gets down the bottom, it's going to come up. And we've got something happen over there, have we? No.
So that bit is. These little fellas down in our laundry. I came in here without the light on and I think I stepped on him because I felt something under the edge of my little toe, and then he started squealing. I just found him, so there's nowhere he went. I hope he's okay. He looks alright. Back to work. Staff development day on the first day, and we've got, I'm really not entirely sure what the day has in store for us. We're going to a function centre in Yarramundi, and we've all got to go to work first, get on a bus and travel to the function centre by bus, because the function centre isn't set up for large amounts of parking. So I'm really not entirely sure what the day has in store for us. It's a little bit annoying. I've got to go all the way to work because I could drive to the function centre faster if I went directly. But we will see what it has. I'm pretty sure it's meant to be a team building day. Actually, I'm not pretty sure of that. That's just me spitballing ideas. Our activation yesterday was excellent practice to get something done in a time frame. So normally we get up there, we go out to practice, and we basically pop a standpipe in, hook a hose up, take turns spraying it around, get the generators, the pumps out, fill a bin with water, take turns practicing using the pump, at different stations and just spraying the trees and that sort of stuff. So just getting used to the equipment. With this particular one, we had to set up and prepare as though like fire was coming our way, because it certainly looked like it. We had to do things in a much more orderly and quicker fashion. In order to get to the back of our place, I needed to hook up 3 hoses. 2 hoses made it almost to the back, so we needed the 3rd hose. And then we set up another one further down the street at the end of the street, since the fire was sort of coming from that direction. It was just being prepared. We weren't in immediate danger, but it could be, it was starting to turn our direction. We were fortunate that the wind that was sort of flipping in 2 directions just died down completely. We ended up going to a lookout that looks down into the gully, like literally the end of our gully. We could stand at that lookout and look directly down on the fire, or the hazard reduction, and you could actually see, like we'd see little lines of fire pop up, and we're going, oh, how's that? That doesn't seem to be spotting, especially when you saw it, a line of fire appearing upwind. And then one other, like, people were coming down to this lookout, and one other person sort of said, oh yeah, you can see the RFS down there. And sure enough, you look down and you could see Rural Fire Brigade members with their drip lines, which is a backpack with a little, almost like a flame torch, but instead of firing fire out, it just drips it down. When they pull the trigger, it just drips fuel down onto the ground, and they can walk along and just light the undergrowth, and it means that you generally get a steadier burn. We could see them, and that's why we were seeing it sort of move upwind of the fire bits that we could see. So it was all basically heading down into the national park, and I guess they were sort of just creeping it upwards. So they went like, we'll light this bit that's heading towards the national park, we'll then walk upwind a bit, light another bit, that'll burn down towards where we've been burning, and when it gets to where we've already been burning, it self-extinguishes generally. We were watching that, keeping an eye on it and watching the guys walking around, but we were leaving stuff set up. Myself and our second in charge, we've both got to come to work today, and we said, well, the other 2 guys could pack up the stuff in the morning or throughout the day, depending on what the situation is. And my second in charge thought about it later and went, you know, they're both retired or semi-retired. The bloke was like a little bit under the weather yesterday, or on that day, and the lady who is our commander, like she can do various things, but trying to undo every standpipe and roll up all the hoses, I think might have been a bit beyond her fitness. Around 7:30, the second in command guy gave me a call, and he said, you know, I think we should probably pack this stuff up tonight. And I said, well, if you think so, then I can come and help you. What he's going to do is drive back to that lookout and have another look and make a decision. And he came back and said the amount of fire was dramatically reduced. You can still hear the people down there, so they're working on it, keeping an eye on it. And with the fact that the wind had all died down, he said we probably should pack it up. So we went out there in the dark and rolled up 7 30-metre hoses and all of the connectors and nozzles and the standpipes. That's not what you want to try and do late at night. I'm going to go sign off when we've all finished everything. We're now deactivating. This morning I got up, had a look out. There was no active smoke. There was only like the smoke that sort of just settles in the gully at night. As I look back up the mountain now, there's no sign of anything up there. I said it was a good exercise to do it under an actual activation scenario rather than just fiddling around in the street. Most of it's still in the street, it's just that we went to the back of the houses to wet down the area. So from where I was standing in our yard, I could wet down the fire trail that's kind of getting a little overgrown behind the houses, and wet down the ground and some of the foliage around the backs of the properties, the houses. So in that sense, I felt like it was a really good exercise for me myself, being able to get down there and use the hose for a little bit more prolonged of a time, and actually targeting specific stuff rather than just going, spray the tree, spray the tree, spray the... One of the neighbours, who is a member of the crew, decided not to activate. He goes, no, I don't think so. I don't think that's going to be a concern. Like, alright, your crew commander said we're activating, and your opinion means that you're not going to help out. Why did you sign up and train in the first place? In essence, our job as a community fire unit is not to be in the front line of the fire. We're meant to, when we activate, set up standpipes and hoses, wet down and prepare the properties, and then if the fire actually does come our way, the fire brigade come down and they go, right, shoot off. And if we're told to evacuate, we evacuate. If we're not told to evacuate but they're coming down to fight fires that are approaching, then they fight the bulk of the fire, and then when they say, like, we've got it, but your crew's job now is to monitor that little area around the houses and just look out for spot fires, smouldering, that sort of thing, and take care of that. Oh, it's smoky down here. It's all settled down this end of the mountain. Okay, now it's going to be the first day of school because the kids will be there today. Yesterday really didn't feel like a day of school. It turned out that we went to a clearing area. I think it's run by an organisation called Murrumidiga. That was the names that were on their shirts and everything. Aboriginal education and information support. The amount of projects that one of the blokes was trying to get happening were incredible. But for us, for that day, first of all, we had a talk with all of us about just some of the cultural things that we might want to be aware of, that the kids might want to be aware of. then we got broken into 3 groups that we rotated through the day. One of the groups was to basically have a lecture, a chat type thing, where they were talking about pretty much Aboriginal history since colonisation. And he would ask, when did colonisation happen? And the usual answer is 1788, because that's when the first fleet arrived in Sydney Cove and started the European penal colony that was Australia. Well, there was at that time, is it New Holland? New Holland, because the Dutch had basically been over on the west coast of Australia about a century earlier or more. Anyway, so it started going through that sort of history, and then they had the map up of the Aboriginal nations and languages as they were known, and there was close to 350, I think he said, nations across the country, some larger areas than others. And he pointed to one area and he said in 1972, I'm going to get this wrong, but I think it was a tribe of women of 17 women and children were discovered that had not had contact with whites at all, with European settlers. In the Northern Territory, there was a small family group that were discovered in 1984 that had had no contact whatsoever with Europeans. So he said, like, when you think about it, colonisation has been pretty steady depending on where you go in the country. It's just that 1788 was when the first fleet of convicts arrived in Sydney. As we spread out and like they headed down to Victoria, headed down to Tasmania for the penal colony down there, across to Adelaide where it was not a penal colony. All that movement, as they spread out, you were going to be coming into contact with Aboriginal people who had never come into contact before. So the timeline has been pretty fluid right up until 1984. 1967 was when the referendum was held to give Aboriginal people citizenship so that they could actually be counted as citizens and could vote. 1967. A lot of us have heard about the stolen generation. There was the apology for the stolen generation years ago by Kevin Rudd, Prime Minister. The stolen generation was like the children who were taken away. And that continued right up into the 70s, the 1970s. But there was also, I'm going to forget it all, I should have said this yesterday afternoon. I think it was, there were 2 others. I think one might have been the forgotten generation and the hidden generation. Hidden generation were, I was saying there are a lot of Aboriginal people who, if they had already been in contact with Europeans and had mixed families, as some of the skin got lighter, they said that they would identify as one of the other cultural groups that were coming into the country, that were immigrating in, such as the Greeks, the Italians, Indian, Pakistani, Asian, all that sort of stuff. And so they would be noted as of that sort of descent. And the reason they did that was because even though immigrants weren't necessarily treated that well early on, they were allowed to get paid the same wage. They were allowed to own land, whereas Aboriginal people were paid 50% wage and weren't allowed to own land. So they would hide their generation. And they'd only just start to discover once the eldest people had passed away, the stories would come out and people were just finding out about the fact that they had Aboriginal ancestry because they thought they were Indian or Greek or something like that. There was an awful lot of information in that talk, and that was really eye-opening because I didn't know all of it, didn't know half of it, and I thought I knew a fair bit, and I'm pretty sure some of the history teachers who were answering, like when was colonisation, the answer 1788 came from a history teacher, but there's a lot more to it. The other two group sessions we were taken to an area of rock carving that was kind of like a men's business area, where that's where initiation ceremonies were held for boys becoming men, and they told us how that sort of thing happened and how the ceremonies are different across the country depending on what tribe, what background. And he showed us all the way around that area and that sort of thing. And the third one, we were taken to a dancing circle that's on the site, and we're nearby, but he said it was too overgrown to go down and we were too big a group as well. There is a rock shelter that was used for women's business that had been pretty much in continual use for the last 15,000 years. I won't say up until recently because they still do. We got to do a sign into country if you wanted to, which was by putting your handprint using ochre and spitting it out onto a tree and basically saying hi to country. So I took part in that. But some of the things that they're doing with the younger kids, the younger generations, to try and make sure that they don't lose their culture, they don't forget about it. Very, very good day. It was a very worthwhile staff development day, building our understanding as well as building our ties with each other, with the group. We do have a number of staff who are of Aboriginal descent. Or I should just say who are Aboriginal. I don't know, I'm not sure how you're supposed to say that. Because I say I'm Australian, but I'm also of Irish descent, of Scottish descent, of German descent, French, Norwegian. There's all these different areas, but I don't say all of those. I say I'm Australian. I would think that, and the reason you have that thing of saying of such and such descent is because they were areas that aren't here. Whereas I think someone who is Aboriginal, who identifies as an Aboriginal, and I say that because some people still don't. Yeah, I think they would say I'm Aboriginal because when some introduce themselves to you, they will say, like, I'm Darug, which is this area in where our school is. Or they might say Kamilaroi or Wiradjuri, or depending on where their family ties go back to, and some of them will have multiple ties. One of the girls in my staff room, she's an Aboriginal woman who I think she's Darug, and I can't remember if hers was Kamilaroi or Wiradjuri. I think it's Kamilaroi. I'm going to ask that question to her and even thought. Anyway, first day of school, rained overnight. Depending on how wet it is down at the school, we may not have an assembly this morning to welcome the kids back. Just finished with year 8, and there's a lot of energy in that group. I got interrupted before. Didn't want to keep filming when another teacher was coming into the room. Year 8 was good. There's a few kids who are doing really well. They're working ahead and getting their pinball machines functional, getting the flipper mechanism working. I've just had year 11. There are some kids out doing a new TAFE course to get them employment or possibly apprenticeships, and there was quite a few that just signed out early. So I had 4 here out of 22, 23, but the 4 that were here were working and getting on with the prac, working on their skills, measuring, cutting, safety, all that sort of stuff. So we're moving along. I've got to get them onto the next cluster, or next task in the next week or so. We can keep working on this one, but I've got to give them the new one. Try and keep to the timeline of the regional TAS and not just let it slide behind, because then if the tasks don't start on time, you just fall further and further behind. As long as you're starting on time, it kind of can hurry the previous one on, but you can still work on 2 at the same time. Just finished another lesson with year 11. I had 10 students in total. 3 that were working, only 2 that were working consistently. Some of them only just realised that I had the evidence camera, and they asked what the phone was doing. I said, well, it records a time lapse and it lets me see who's working, who's not working, who helps others. So I can see that student's maybe a little bit further along than some. And I said the only people who see it is myself and Region, if they ask for evidence as to why a student wasn't given their certificate or why they were. Because it shows this student was doing the work, this student was not doing the work. And they said, I only just realised, I've only just seen that. And I went, it's been there a lot. Usually during prac lessons, because that's when I might be a little bit busier and I can't see what all the kids are doing. And that's the idea. If I'm helping some students here and there's students working down there, I might not see them, but I'll see later that they were helping out or that they weren't helping out or they weren't working. I had that for years and years and years. Been a good tool. It's not something that gets published anywhere. It's just an evidence monitoring apparatus. I don't think I've got these guys tomorrow. I've been asked to be deputy on Friday, Monday and Tuesday, so they'll miss a couple of lessons, so I've got to try and set some stuff. I mean, they have a lot of things that they've got to do for task 2. I think I'm going to have to give them a little bit of a hand and a nudge along. They've all got a paper copy of the task, and that's the thing that I'll use as, here we go, here's how we'll work out what your answers are and have discussions around, and then they can go on to the online part and complete the actual assessment.